Today I'm going to be talking about Operative, and if you're here because you're struggling to make Operative very useful, don't worry too much about that. You are not in the minority. Operative has been extensively nerfed since the game's release, and it's not the best. The scaling's not the best on it, its abilities aren't the best on it, it has very low attack economy, it has very low debuff economy, and there aren't that many builds that don't appear to be not abusing glitches that are actually very good in the endgame. However, we do know in the next DLC we are getting a slight buff to Operatives, which is their main mechanic, Analyze Enemy, will work on extra turns. So let's talk about how this works and sort of how you want to consider building it. So let's talk about the main ability here. So Analyze Enemies is the first ability that we get with it. The Operative targets one enemy within their line of sight. That target immediately gains 1 plus initial bonus divided by 2 exploits. At the start of their main turn, every enemy in their line of sight also gains 1 exploit. Exploits is going to be the main mechanic, and it will explain how Operative works. So an exploit: if the Operative hits a target with an exploit stack, that attack deals 5 times perception bonus percentage more damage. The damage is also increased by 10% for each exploit on the target. The attack removes all exploits from the target. Currently, this is bugged, and exploits will not be removed by burst attacks or area attacks. This means that on a burst fire you can do quite really high damage, and area you can hit a lot of targets for fairly good damage. However, these buffs, even if you have 10 stacks of exploits, aren't doing more than what the other archetypes do, so even using these bugs makes Operative very low use. And unfortunately, talents like Tide of Excellence will not proc unless you use a single shot to actually consume those exploits. The level 3 feature is Expose Weakness. The Operative removes all exploits from a target, decreasing the target's dodge, parry, and armor by 15 plus exploits removed times perception bonus divided by 3 until the start of the Operative's next turn. This is unfortunately bugged for using the Servo Skull pet in Overseer, because what it does is it just minuses 15% and it doesn't count anything to do with exploits or even the perception bonus. So that's why Overseer is not the best for Operative, and why the big update in DLC 2 didn't really change the Operative meta at all. The second part of this ability, if it reduces target's armor to 0, the Operative removes only half the number of exploits from the target. So removing armor is actually removing straight damage reduction. If a target has 30% armor, that means that they reduce damage by 30%. The soft cap of this is 90%, but if you can get things to 0, obviously these are huge damage boosts. This is actually what makes Operative quite useful. However, Expose Weakness is a single target once per turn ability, and you need extra turns to be able to use it again. And this just does way less than, say, an Iron Eye Grenade, which is a consumable grenade that you can get, but you get infinite stacks and generate it from colony projects that does a big area, just 50% armor strip on all enemies. You throw that out first and use Expose Weakness to try and get them to 0, and you can do some quite impressive damage, especially with the Exemplar talent Degrade Defense, but Operative isn't really needed for that, as there are better ways to armor strip on other classes, such as Destroyer on melee classes, or even Grand Performance from the Blade Dancer or the Blade Dancer's Heroic Act defaults. The Heroic ability is also not quite as good as the other base archetypes, which is Dismantling Attack. The Operative immediately inflicts +1 exploit on each enemy in combat, then makes a free attack against the target. They can even use ranged weapon in melee range, and this attack always hits, though not always with arc rifles, as that is currently bugged. Until the end of combat, the target of this attack suffers -30% penalty to armor, block, dodge, and parry. Unfortunately, this isn't very good, because the best way to CC and debuff enemies is to straight up kill them. If every other archetype can one-shot enemies, why do you need to lower any of their stats? If you needed to lower their stats to be able to kill them with other archetypes, Operative would be a lot more valuable, but unfortunately, even on unfair max sliders, it just quite isn't. You can beat the game with just pure Operative, so it is very possible, but you do notice that there is a distinctive power difference between Operative and other archetypes, which is why in the late game you tend to just skip the Operative's turn, because it's quicker just to straight up just kill everything with everyone else. Unfortunately, we're going to be continuing with the doom and gloom when we start looking at how some of these talents work. One of the best talents that we see is Tide of Excellence, which is whenever the Operative triggers an exploit on an enemy, the Operative gains +1 damage and +2 armor penetration until the end of combat. Now, with weapons like arc rifles, you can hit like 5+ targets and you can get 5 stacks of this, so it can stack very quickly, and it's actually better than Extermination. The only problem is, Operative only gets 1 attack a turn, and unlike other archetypes, it doesn't easily increase its attack economy unless you're specifically being a Psyker using something like the Warp Surge Brooch. Even many of their tier 2s, they don't offer very much in the way of increasing attack economy, because obviously you don't have access to Daring Breach or Firearm Mastery or Death Walls. However, with Finest Hour, you can do that, so there is a way that Operative can be playable. However, if you can't use your own archetype to increase it and you're relying on another archetype, why would you just stick with the base archetype? This is the problem that you find with Operative. It can perform with extensive support from the party, however, it requires that extensive support from the party, and other options use that support better. Another one, for example, fresh target. Whenever the Operative attacks the enemy at full wounds, the attack deals additional damage based on 10 plus perception bonus. However, if they're not at maximum health, this is now a dead talent. So it would have been nice if it worked a little bit differently, because other classes just get free damage bonuses, whereas Operative always has weird conditions. Instant exposure can make your exposed weakness cost 0 AP, but because the exposed weakness itself isn't exactly high valuable, you don't tend to take this very often. Weak body, weak soul is one that is useful for taking out bosses because you can lower their toughness and willpower by your intelligence bonus. It's not the most in the world, but it will lower their health, which is pretty good. Ballistic calculations is one of those ones that seems like it'd be very good. If the Operative attacks and a target affected by an exploit from a distance of 10 cells further, that attack deals 15% damage. Unfortunately, this is like a tier 2 talent. Most tier 1 talents for other archetypes scale with your stats and the tier 2s don't, whereas Operative's tier 1, it doesn't scale. It will always only be 15% and you do need that exploit on it. So if you remove the enemy's armor, you now lose the damage bonus. So if they had that 15% armor and then you take this off to get a 15% damage boost, yeah, you're going to lose this damage boost, basically, though stripping the armor is very valuable. Combat Insight is another one. When the Operative Perception is 10 or higher, they gain 1 AP and ignore the enemy's deflection. Deflection is very low value because at endgame, even having 10 deflection is only 10 less damage, which is practically nothing. And if the enemy has 90% armor, that's actually only 1 deflection, so you're essentially ignoring somewhere between 1 and 10 damage. So Combat Insight, again, this is something that can only be used at the endgame, but it doesn't have value at the endgame. Comprehensive analysis. If the analyzed enemy has 2 or more exploits, the target gets 1 additional exploit. Yeah, almost not useful first round because enemies won't have 2 or more, so not very usable. Continuous analysis. If the start of the Operative's turn, the enemy with the largest number of exploits receives an additional exploit stack if it has more enemies. So you can, instead of having 1, it'll have 2, which then means you can use comprehensive analysis so you can get an extra 1. 2 talents to get 2 exploits, so that's like 20% damage increase on targets that have exploits when you consume them. It's very low impact, very low impact. Covert protocols, this is just a weaker version of Soldier's Fortress, which is, whilst you're in partial cover, you get increased bonuses. Soldier has this, but they also get damage bonuses. Improved Tactics is actually a very good one. This is an upgrade to Tactical Knowledge, which is when you build stacks of removing those exploits, you can actually add your int bonus damage. So this one is one of those rare ones that is very good, and it does scale with your stats, but it still has harsher conditions than most of the other classes. Inflict Despair is another one that is almost unlikely to proc, which is when the Operative hits an enemy that is affected by an exploit and exposed weakness, the enemy loses 3 MP and their damage is reduced by 10%. So this is lowering enemies' damage modifiers by 0.1, so if they have a ×3, they'll have a 2.9 times instead. However, if you've used exposed weakness, chances are they're not going to have an exploit, so this is almost never going to be up. If the Operative uses precise attack on a target affected by 6 or more exploits and scores a hit, that hit becomes a critical hit. This isn't really worthwhile because the problem is chances are by endgame when you can actually use this, again those 6 exploits is going to be pretty hard because to actually get them you're probably going to need close to 100 in anyway when you use Analyze, but chances are you'll always crit anyway because you've had to be buffed up by your allies because excessive but ballistic skill becomes crit chance and there are other abilities coming from allies to increase your crit chance. Joint Offensive is another example of just really low Operative scaling. The Operative's allies gain 2% hit chance and critical hit chance when attacking enemies affected by exploits. Yeah, even at 100 int, this will probably only really add 3%. So it's a 3% party buff. There are items that just give you 10% to the entire party by equipping them. So this, again, is another low value one. Offensive Pan Predictions. The Operative suffers 9% less damage from enemies affected by exploits. So again, this isn't 9%. What it's doing is it's reducing modifiers by 0.09. So again, if an enemy has a ×4 modifier, it's removing 0.09 from that ×4. It's not reducing it by 9%. So again, very low value, and you need enemies already affected by exploits. So if they're acting before you, they're going to get full damage anyway. Passive learning. On their first turn in combat, the Operative randomly distributes the same number of exploits as when using Analyze enemies among all enemies in a 10-cell radius. This one's very good, but it means you need to be very close, and you don't really have survival as an Operative, so It's risky. It's very, very risky. But I imagine with the rework coming for DLC 3, this is actually going to be very valuable. Reactive Study. If an enemy affected by an exploit within 5 cells from the Operative attacks the Operative or their ally, that enemy suffers one additional exploit. Now, this would be useful for proccing offensive pattern predictions, but you already need them to have an exploit to do it. Some people have reported they will add an exploit even if they don't have exploits, but even then, 2 talents to add 0.09 mitigation, not the best. Sharpshooter, another example. The Operative has not moved this turn. They deal +2 more damage with single shot attacks, so that's int bonus divided by 2 for every 5 cells between them and the target, and they also gain perception bonus ballistic skill. These bonuses do not stack and last until the Operative moves. The fact that you're not allowed to move makes this almost worthless, and even then you need additional increments of 5 cells. It's too much to make this worthwhile. Operative's restrictions, again, make them very lackluster. This would be better if it was, say, every 3 cells beyond, so that way it's beyond sniper range, and that way you get 2 of them stacking, and this would really help boost up single shots. Right now, single shots cannot compete with area attacks, and they don't even begin to compete with burst fire. Sniper Expertise will allow Perfect Spot to get additional arm penetration, but excess arm penetration does nothing. So it could be useful, but chances are it's not going to be, especially if you're going for a plasma build. All this excess arm pen won't do anything. Pretty good for sniper rifles, however. Uncanny Sight is actually one of my favourite ones. It puts an exploit on everyone, even if they're not in your line of sight, so it is very useful to start building them up over the course of battle, but chances are battles won't go on long enough to get a lot of value out of this. As you can see, Operatives are trying to focus on long-ranged area attacks, and they use intelligence perception. However, the main use of intelligence is to buff area weapons, which are going to be close combat, so 3 cells and less. That means that your main stat to buff your main type of weapon, you can't use any talents for, so area weapons aren't as useful for Operative, even though that's what you'd think it'd be able to build for. If there was ever a rework coming to Operative, I would like to see them support obviously range and close combat, and to remove the restriction of making it on single shot, so that way you could use aerial burst with these builds, so that way you've now got your long range and close range specialist. The disappointment doesn't just end with talents, it also looks at abilities. So one option we have here is joint analysis. Until the Operative's next turn, their allies' attacks also remove exploits and deal int bonus more damage. If your intelligence bonus is +4, that is +4, so it is something, but it's not a lot. I would like to see this be 2 times int bonus, just so we could get more mileage out of it, or even if it had an upgrade that allowed it to do 2 times int bonus. Precise attack, the next attack against target affected by an exploit, the target's cover efficiency and block will be reduced by 15 plus perception bonus divided by 3 times stacks of exploits. This will have additional hit chance. Additional hit chance is good because once you go beyond 60 hit chance, so that means you always hit with your base, that becomes crit chance. So this will really help land critical hits, but beyond that, it doesn't really do much extra, but it is nice to guarantee criticals. Intimidation is very good with arc rifles because you can spread this out a lot. The Operative's next non-area attack inflicts the intimidation effect on the first target hit by the attack and all enemies in a 5-cell radius around that target. The damage dealt by intimidating enemies is reduced by 7% until the Operative's next turn. This negative effect is double for enemies with less than 12% armor. It would be nice if they also took additional damage because that would give this a lot more value, but as it currently is, it's not very good because, like I said, 0.07 minus from modifiers isn't a lot. You're probably not going to notice it, if anything at all. Perfect Spot is quite useful. The Operative gains 25% cover efficiency if in cover. They also get 15 perception and 15 ballistic skills, so it's like 15 extra hit and crit chance basically, and the perception is useful for a lot of things, and you can also get the extra arm penetration. It's one of the ones I go for, but it's still not exactly fantastic compared to, say, rapid fire on a soldier. The last one is tactical knowledge. The Operative removes 1 exploit from an enemy in a 5-cell radius around a point with 10 cells from the Operative. If there is only 1 enemy in that area, the Operative removes all exploits and stacks from that enemy. All allies gain exploits remove percentage armor until the end of combat. This will stack, so this is very good. You can, if you say remove 10 exploits, get 10% extra armor. It's not the best, it's quite slow, but it is useful. If 4 or more exploits are removed, the Operative deals 2 times exploit removed percentage more damage until the end of combat, and with the upgrade you can also put in your intelligence bonus. The second part doesn't stack, so you need to get as many stacks as you can for it. But if the second part did stack, this would make this more useful. But chances are, when you're going through builds, you're going to end up taking Perfect Spot and Tactical Knowledge because it is the best of a bad bunch. As for the upgrades on Dismantling Attack, one of them, until the operative's next turn, the target cannot move until the end of combat, the target's MP is reduced by 3. This would be very useful for arc rifles if you didn't just kill everything and it wasn't mostly all trash mobs and encounters. Dismantling Attack also cripples enemies' weapon skill and bliss skill by 30 to the end of combat. Useful against bosses, worthless outside of boss encounters. Dismantling Attack also intimidates all enemies in a 5-cell radius around the target, reducing their dodge and armor by 15% until the end of combat. Again, not all that useful. It is the two that I pick is 3 and 2, but And the last one is the target also provokes attacks of opportunity whenever it attacks. Again, this would be highly valuable if enemies could survive more than one turn. So, I will be showing off a test build that I put together, which is going to be a operative that uses arc rifles and shotguns, with later going into dual pistols, but that's from some other shenanigans that I will save for a completely different video. So the primary weapon is going to be arc rifles, because those single shots will apply a lot to operative stuff, and obviously it gets extra critical damage based from intelligence. The items I've got equipped on it is just kind of what I've got going on around here. Hidden auto stimulum, the mark of the ruler, throwing on the simp skin to get a little bit of extra dodge. Obviously, getting our stats up with the Von Valancius cloaks, that's very useful early game, and Warmonger boots, which was whenever we kill 2 or more enemies with a single attack, the attack does not spend all of our MP, and just the zero sum lens, because it's just a percentage chance to ignore damage, which is really valuable for what I have at the moment. For my level ups, I took the first rank in Medicaid, which is just so I could use Medicaid kits. Went with Uncanny Sight just because stacking up exploits across combat is going to be very useful. The first one I took is actually part of Fortress World, which is Never Stop Believing. This will give me chances to proc additional chances of getting a free attack economy, basically, which fixes some of the operative issues. Taking Tide of Excellence because arc rifles will proc this a lot. More bliss skill. I went perfect spot, like I said, just to get extra perception and bliss skill so I can guarantee landing some of those hits and preventing dodge. The skills that I'm focusing on this build is Law Imperium and Law Xenos, so you could easily do tech use, logic, Law Warp, or even awareness. It's just kind of what I have for the example. Sniper expertise to get additional arm penetration, which is going to be 11% extra, which will go on top of the arc rifle, which will probably make sure enemies have 0. Because I'm going arc rifles, I'm taking the common feature Staggering Jolt. If you want to see what that does, you can look it up, but I won't explain that because this is not a build video. Dismantling up to upgrade attack 3, more perception because perception and intelligence is what you want. Bliss calculations, so enemies that are far away I will just always have damage boost, which is useful if enemies are missing HP, because fresh target, which can sometimes be better, isn't always in play. Tactical knowledge, which is so I can get additional damage based on exploits coming off, but also so I can add my intelligence to my damage. Echo Pulse, another good one for arc rifles. Then I've started getting improved for tactics, like I said, so I can get extra damage going in there. More intelligence and residual charge, so I can try and get extra attacks. This it will actually stack with some assassin features, but again, that will be safe for a build video. And the final one for rank 15, yeah, just taking the upgrade number 2 here, so that way I can lower enemy skill of the bosses for bliss skill and weapon skill. So let's have a little look at combat, and I'll talk through some of what we're doing. So in this combat, I actually have access to 2 operatives. The first one here is going to be Pascal, which I'm going to be using to give Machine Spirit Communion buff to some of our allies. And I'm also going to hit Joint Analysis, which will give more damage to the rest of the team. I'm going to mostly skip his turn and go straight to my operative to show off more of what I want to do here. So I'm also just going to do pretty much the same with Heinrichs. I'm going to throw out a joint buff here. I'm going to increase the defenses of the party rather than focus on what he's doing, so we can talk more about the operative. So we're going to just skip through that. The enemy's going to be coming in. I've got my front line up there because I want Heinrichs to be taking the hits because he'll tank it very well because of his psycho abilities. But more importantly is the enemies are going to start stacking up, which means that we'll be able to get some really nifty shots off. So we have our first group of enemies here, and if we look at our hit chance, we've got 52% there, 95 there, and that's mostly because of range. But if I move over to here, I can get that 95 up to this group of enemies. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to activate Perfect Spot. We have a group of enemies that I can use our tactical knowledge on. I could even use part of my Surefire plan here to get some debuffs to them. That comes into the operative stuff. So now I can apply some exploits to someone, and I can also take my shot. So what I will do is I will start with my analyze enemies. So we've got a good chunk of them here. I'm then going to hit Surefire Plan. Now, if I wanted to remove armor, I could have done, but then I wouldn't have been able to use that tactical knowledge. But because I have applied tactical knowledge, you're going to see that we've got an extra 6% armor coming in, which is almost half of what the Psycho adds just for free. But we should also get some pretty good damage boost coming in here.
The Emperor is at
So we did fairly good damage. Like, the time when Operative shines the most is Act 1. And as you saw, we took out a book ton of them. We also got quite a few procs for Never Stop Shooting. So on our next turn, we're probably going to have a bonus turn pretty easily. And I'm also going to use this opportunity to obviously try and use the laser shot here. Well, we've got a 40% chance, but if I move up to here as well, 50, 50, let's see what we do. We missed that one, but that's not too much of an issue. The reason we want to move up as well is so we can get a better line of shot on these enemies. So if I move around to this side, we should have another good chance, because Cassia is going to go next to apply some buffs. So coming back to Cassia, I can then buff my Rogue Trader, another buff here for infusing, and then I can give him an extra turn. From this extra turn, we've got 2 more AP, so I can reapply Perfect Spot. And then if we have a look at some of our stats here, it is going to be pretty nice for this next shot coming in here. We should see a lot of stacks again coming in from some of this stuff here. So we've got good 45% chance to take a shot here. Boom. Criticals because of the buffs. I did forget to add Surefire Plan. But we did some really good damage here, and this all coming in from all the stacks from the party. So we've got our priest adding some base damage in here, we've got our officer adding in some base damage, so we've also got that Litany of Hatred, we've got that Joint Analysis. Tide of Excellence is going to be stacking up quite a bit. We'll see that if we look at some of the later ones, but that's obviously because of the single shots from the Arc Rifle damage modifiers. So this is peak Operative. This is the best point in the game to use them, and it's where they're very nice and impressive, and it's just unfortunately because of the lack of scaling they start falling behind. But like I said, DLC 3 hopefully be adding a lot more ink gear, so hopefully things will start getting more impressive for them, and hopefully with having exploits and extra turns they will actually be more useful. So I'm hoping to see that next time I cover a build video for Operative in DLC 3 that my opinion will change. I'll be like, this is just a fantastic class, like we love it, we love to see it. But until then, this is kind of what we've got working with. And if I'm very lucky here, let's see if we can proc a finest hour, because if we can, then maybe our officer can add in some good goodies. And it can. So we're able to finest hour Constantine here, which means that we'll be able to get some more attack. So if I move him up further, now we're going to be really cheeky here, because we've got quite a few exploits going on here. So we might be able to stack some more stuff for armor. So if we can try and get in as many enemies as we can, which is very good. We've also got a free attack coming in because of the use of our Never Stop Shooting. So we will apply this here. We'll get our free attack. Boom. Really good damage coming in there. But the problem that we're going to start to see is going to be reload cost. So let's see if we can get lucky here. We were able to put out another one, so we're going to lose quite a bit to reload here, but we should be able to get another nice attack, see if we can bounce some things around. Now again, we're going to lose opportunities at hit chance because of distance is a bit of an issue, but we can go for the one that we're guaranteed to hit, but I don't think it's enough to bounce to these guys, so I'm going to take the risk. And it just pays off. So that's actually a very impressive Operative display here. I spent all that time downplaying Operative, and like I said, in Act 1 it looks very impressive, but this is the peak gameplay. But there is a very naughty build I'm working on with Assassin, because I think there are some Assassin exploits that we can use with the Promise of Retribution and Freedom, as well as Arc Rifles, but that I'll cover in another video. If you do want to see that, then do let me know in the comments below that you want to see the Lightning Assassin, and I'll get a video done on it. But that's all I've got for today. I hope in DLC 3 we see some improvements, so the next time I cover Operative, I'm like, best class, great class, fantastic class, love this class. I'm Rem619, and I'll see you all in the next video.